So without any further ado, I'm going to hand you over to Warda Conrad, who's going to talk about business and education from the Department of from the Western Cape Education Department's perspective. As I said, Warda is here to represent Brian Schroeder, who would have loved to be here, but he had to be in Pretoria today.
Said that, like any good organization, like any good business, the Western Cape Education Department took a hard look at itself. After a quarter of a century, looking at performance outcomes and admitting that the 150 to 200 million that we spend per annum on teacher development has had almost no impact. Yes, sure. It's a sad indictment on the situation in which we find ourselves, and Louise is quite right. I'm going to sketch you a little bit of a scenario around the context. Critical to say that when we had a look at ourselves, what we realized is the culture of learning needs to change. And that meant that the culture within our organization had to change. And that meant that where we had 1,500 fragmented visions, 8 district divisions, all bouncing off in different directions, anybody who runs any kind of organization, anybody who has a family, knows and understands that for you to achieve success, you need a collective, singular, highly articulate, easy to latch onto vision. And that vision is very clear, as Louisa said. It's quality education for every child, in every classroom, in every school in the province. And the HOD will tell you that he emphasizes that deliberately. Because if we leave one child behind, the blood of the children who are shot as a result of gangsters, who succumb to drugs, the blood of those children are on our hands. And it's time we accept our culpability in that scenario. And then step up to the plate, because it's time to batter up. And that means in the Western Cape, unfortunately, the context is what it is. Good afternoon, Mr. Manuel. Don't look anything like your photo, and neither did I, actually. The lighting wasn't doing much for my melanin. In the Western Cape, we have 1,100,000 learners in our system. And as Louise says, we get 25,000 new learners entering in the system year on year. 18,000 of those, by the way, coming from the Eastern Cape, without any funding following at all. That means, if you think of the size of a school, 1,000 learners to a school, we have to be building 25 schools per annum to keep up. What we've managed to do and deliver last year is 5 schools complete. And then when we deliver the school building. What we then have to put in are the teachers, the books, the resources in order for a school to function on day one. Inevitably, there's a delay. So what we're doing in the Western Cape is we're saying, yes, this is our context, and you're very, very, very familiar with the context of drugs, the high prevalence of HIV and AIDS in the Western Cape, and climbing, the high prevalence of teenage pregnancy, and climbing. Seemingly everything we're attempting to do in that space is having very little impact. And when we take a cold, hard look at the state of education, we have to accept that there's certain things that we've been doing well and other things that we've done appallingly. And that means that we need to be courageous when we make statements like that. And we need to be vulnerable, because there's nothing worse than standing in front of a bunch of adults running multi-million rand organizations, I'm sure, and saying, we've messed this up. And this is what I'm doing today. 33,000 educators We started out as having the best learner-teacher ratio in the country. We now have of the worst. Of the worst. Through no fault of our own, but of the worst. And that means, unfortunately, that the leafy suburb schools, the 450 schools that you see, they're getting bombarded with applications, and what it does is it creates a further divide in our education system. We have the haves and the desperate to haves. We've got 1,516 schools. 58,000 of our learners, we transport them at our expense. We're feeding close to 50% of our learners. 471,000 learners, we give them 2 meals a day. 2 meals a day. And if you try and imagine a learner who is on the 11 o'clock slot for their second meal, their lunchtime meal, which will be their last meal of the day until the next 7 o'clock meal. That is the reality that our children live with. When you hear fireworks, they fall on the floor because they're expecting gunshots. We've got learners in our system who rush home in the afternoon and find a place on the couch because that's where they're going to sleep. This is the reality in which our children exist. And into that, we expect that they perform while we shove content into resistant heads. We try and tell them the only way out of the poverty cycle is through education, and we know that to be a truth. We know it. Many of us are standing here as examples of getting out of the poverty cycle through the medium of education. My mother had standard 2. She educated 5 children, highly educated children, standard 2, and how she pushed was, people can take anything from you. They can take your home, they can take your identity, but they can never take what is between your ears and the skills that you have to pull yourself out by the bootstraps. In our situation, currently, our children don't have boots, let alone bootstraps. And that means that we need to do something radical. So our theory of change is disruption. We need to disrupt the way we think about learning, and we disrupt the way you think about your responsibility into the space of learning. You need to disrupt, I gave at the office thinking. It's not good enough. It's not good enough for you as a human being, and it's not good enough for that child who's desperately crying out through their behavior and their conduct. They're crying to us every single day, and then we label them as being badly behaved. What they are, they're children. They're children fighting to survive in a world that has made them what they are. Which means we have to show them an alternate way of living, an alternate way of being. Louise, how can you be indicating to me 5 minutes? This is a tough place to speak. I'm on slide 2. This is just not right. Didn't even get to the good stuff yet. Okay. So, this is what we're looking at. In quintile, I don't have my glasses on. It's the most wonderful thing, isn't it? Aging. Whose idea was that? Anyway, so this is what we've got here. These are fee-paying schools. This is fee-paying in quintile 4, and that's our no fee-paying schools. And as you can see, the jump in academics. However, there's a persistent inequality gap. And what the Western Cape has decided and has embarked on quite a while back is looking at what are the international levers to overcome poverty and to leapfrog this inequality gap. And what we've done is we've accepted that there's a couple of things that we are able to do, and that is technology in education, or e-learning, which is a global lever, and it's recognized as a global lever. And we've been doing it in the Western Cape for quite some while. We've been delivering technology into the schools. We've covered the provincial schools with an ICT blanket. I mean, if you just think of a child, when we speak about access to education, we must speak about quality access to quality education. And the way to do that is to leapfrog, if you will, the rot that's out there. And all of us have experienced phenomenal teachers, and all of us have experienced teachers who were frighteningly poor. Let's accept that as a fact, and it's probably going to stay within our system while we weed. It's a tough thing to do, but we're going to weed. So, difficult government employees. I come from the business sector, so weeding is a hobby. So e-learning. And then the other thing that has started as a narrative globally is mindset and attitude. And whenever you talk to a teacher, the one thing they complain about is these children have rotten attitudes. And then when you speak to the headmaster, you say these teachers have rotten attitudes. And when you speak to the circuit managers, they say the principals have rotten attitudes. And when you speak to any of them, they will say head office. They're the problem. So this whole notion of finding levers of change, globally, nobody else is taking these two levers of change, putting them together and applying it to the system at the same time, at scale and en masse, the way the Western Cape education is doing. Nobody else in the world we're making history. And that's where we need you. Because to make history, you need people to move people. The biggest aspect of systemic change is dealing with the largest influential component. And the largest influential component in the Western Cape is that leadership layer. I'll show you again. Is the leadership layer. Louise, ek het nou my kop het nou heeltemal gegaan. Never the mind. Menopause. Another fun time. Fun. The men are looking stupefied. What? I've bought a Porsche. I don't get this menopause business. What's going on? So anyway, let me take a step back. So in my 2 minutes left, so what the Western Cape education has done, it's lifted out this vision and it's directed the entire system to achieving that vision. And how we've done it is, we've said there's a couple of things that you need to do. Number one is you need to lift out the teacher. Thank you very much. You need to lift out the teacher. And you need to lift out the significance of the teacher, and that we did by naming 2017 the year of the teacher. I'm sure some of you have heard this already. If you haven't, that is what we did. And we did it because if a teacher does not understand the impact that he has on a child's life, that teacher needs to exit the building, and preferably rapidly. The next thing we did is we focused on the organization, and we raised the significance. We just pulled out the values of the Western Cape Education Department, which is going to pop up in a minute. And raising this values conversation has ignited an accountability and responsibility belief. Because values equal behavior. You can't talk values in a vacuum. There's always a behavior that directs it or is directed by it. Either way, this is what we've done. And just lifting those values has opened taps in people's thinking. That suddenly it's okay to have a heart in education. Who knew that education allowed your heart to come to the fore? The other one is then focusing on the learner, and 2019 is the year of the learner. And we've done this by pushing out certain mantras, because you know visual cues. Without the visual cue, we're dealing with children and we're dealing with adults. And either way, visual cues direct people. Subliminal learning and all that. And we talk about thinking. I could go on and on and on, but I'm going to hurry up because I'm getting the glad eye. So what you would have noticed is that our focus on the key aspects, the teacher, the organization and its values, and the learner, has resulted in the teacher values the learner. Over the next X number of years, the WCED will continue to focus on language and mathematics. And I know, although many of you sitting here are not educators, you will understand that when we deal with children, we deal with the holistic child. We deal with the head of the child, the hand of the child, and the heart of the child. For the last 25 years, WCED has been phenomenal at dealing with the head of the child. In our head, we thought we were phenomenal. The performance, of course, has been specific to the upper echelons, the middle class and beyond, while we've left the majority of our children behind. That needs to stop, and today. In fact, it stopped a while ago because we've had this ongoing for a bit. So, we're focusing on the technical and vocational skills, and we looking to branch out on those well-performing schools and open up branches of technical schools. We're focusing on STEMAC. I don't know if you're familiar with the STEM education, mathematics, sciences. Now we're doing STEMAC so that we can raise the significance of arts, agriculture, and coding. Agriculture, the biggest contributor in the GDP from the Western Cape is agriculture. And second is tourism. Yet we only have 3 agricultural schools in the province. How does that make sense? If we're thinking of getting our children skilled and employed and contributing adults. And finally, we speak about transform to perform, which addresses the heart, which looks like that. The biggest layer is that leadership layer. And this is where you can come in helping develop proper leaders in the largest cohort of leaders in education, which is our principals. There is nothing that strengthens a principal more than having a mentor, than having somebody to talk to, because you and I both know it's lonely at the top. You can't talk to your subordinates, really. So who do you bounce your weird and wonderful ideas off of? And let's face it, education needs weird and wonderful. We've had staid and boring, and look where that's gotten us. Wearing grey. My kids were not impressed with me this morning when I got dressed. And then, of course, values in education, which we're rolling out across every single school. And what we're asking is have a conversation around values. Have a conversation. That's it. Don't adopt the values. Don't throw out your broederskap value that you've had for the last 150 years. Just have a conversation. Because having a conversation means I have to think about what I need to know that I'm being respected. And then I have to find the words because I have to articulate it. I have to tell you what I need. And then, the hardest thing of all, I have to shut up and listen, because then you're going to tell me what you need. And then even harder, I'm going to have to find a way to compromise between yours and mine so that we can find a common understanding of that value to achieve our common purpose. And then, of course, growth mindset. I don't know if any of you are familiar with this at all. Google, wonderful tool. We don't need teachers to teach content anymore. We just need them to teach skills. Google growth mindset. It's the most remarkable thing. I'm going on and I'm going on and I'm going on. Whoops. So, to close, and I'm going to close on this slide, Louise. To close, leadership and leaders, if you do any kind of research in the leadership space, everybody says the same thing. A leader needs to be vulnerable. Because for a leader to be courageous and make courageous decisions and think innovatively and stop halfway through a disastrous zone, the leader needs to be vulnerable enough to say, this is not working and I need to do something else here. So I ask this very simply. It's time for us to collaborate. It's time for us to put our resources together. I'm almost inclined to say, stop spending your 10,000 on buying a bicycle. Let's pool our money and build me some schools. Thank you very much.